Did you know Variety, the children's charity, is the entertainment charity started by a group of show business people who found an abandoned baby in a theatre way back in 1928. These kind-hearted performers raised so much money to help the lost child that they began helping other children, and Variety, the children's charity, was born. Read the full story and support the entertainers charity that supports kids in need today. Visit variety.org.au. You're listening to the School of Hard Knock Knocks podcast with me, Maury Morgan.
Ladies and gentlemen, your next comedian.
Shouldn't drink on an empty head, you know that, don't you?
That is the shittiest heckle I've ever heard in my life.
Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.
What's a bucket list?
You have dangerously underprepared yourself for the shit that is about to get real.
Kieran Butler is a political satirist, comedic antagonist and general contrarian. Heavily influenced by the Aussie alternative rock band Tism, Kieran Butler is not afraid of speaking his mind and challenging the status quo. But many of you already knew this. For those that aren't familiar with Kieran and his work, you'll enjoy this emotionally charged interview where we delve into the importance of being able to joke about taboos, the politics of the comedy industry, finding one's voice as a stand-up comedian, and the amazing woman Eurydice Dixon, a member of the comedy community who was murdered in Melbourne in June. There's a language warning on this episode, so best listen with your headphones in. Now, here's Kieran Butler.
We are, you're not Australian. You get it now. Well, there's too much forest locked away in our national parks. Let's swim out past the breakers and cull some foreign sharks. Well, the Anzacs race is fucking on. It's as Aussie as genocide. Send them back to die in Sri Lanka. It fills my Aussie heart with pride. 20-odd million cars is way too many. And refugees, if you're seeking asylum, what you are will traumatise your children. 'Cause we are, you're not Australia.
Good afternoon, Kieran. How are you, mate?
Not too bad, Maury. How's yourself?
Oh, very good. It's a Monday and beginning of a new week. Nasty Melbourne weather. You're in Melbourne, I believe?
I am still in Melbourne, yeah. I'm just about to, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be jumping on a plane to head over for an Edinburgh Fringe season. So in that mad preparation stage for, packing up and going overseas for a couple of months.
Wow.
There's a few shows that we'll be doing. I'll be doing in Ireland and possibly in Europe. But
yeah.
As the business goes, a lot of these things are tentative and still to be worked out. But I'll be away for some time. Yep.
Right. Well, actually, I would like to know a bit more about that. Is that, I know Stevie Sticks, one of your free comedy comedians from Melbourne International Comedy Festival. She's already got an aeroplane, I believe. Is she part of any of your touring?
Well, she'll be performing under the. She'll be part of the Ed Fringe program, but also performing in the PBH Free Fringe program, as well as myself and another free comedy alumni, as we like to say, Blaze White. Mm-hmm. I encouraged Stevie after her season in Melbourne.
Yep.
To have a think about. She was going to be in Edinburgh, and I said, "Why don't you think about doing a 7-day run?" And to the best of my knowledge, she's gone and organised all of that on her own. She's a great self-starter.
That's great.
And, that's what people need to be in this business.
Well, that's great, right? So she's your alumni, and she's also my alumni as well. Double alumni.
I think. Look, I mean, I would say that Stevie has. It was her first season with us at Free Comedy, and she made an application. I curate the lineup, and she made an application. I went down to Anglesey one night to see her perform, and I thought, let's put her in the program. And so I really only met Stevie through that process, and she's a hard worker.
Yep, she's.
and she's got a good head on her shoulders, and she's a damn good comedian. Her shows were packed out during the festival, and for good reason, because her show was pure quality from start to finish.
Yeah, she's solid. Just taking a step back, and anyone who knows Kieran Butler knows that you love a good ramble, and there's an example of that. So just for the reference, the people that listen to this podcast are newcomers, kind of like Stevie Sticks was not so long ago, before she broke through and started really kicking goals. They're listening to this podcast because they want to know how you get started. And I want to go back to the Kieran Butler of 2002, 2003, when you decided, because I believe it wasn't comedy that got you started, it was guitar.
Oh, I was a musician before I decided to take that leap onto the comedy stage.
Right.
And I worked as a professional musician all over the world, playing covers.
Yep.
I started way back. I mean, I actually did learn classical guitar when I was 10 or 11 years old, like that proper sort of, you use a footstool and you pluck away.
Yeah.
And but that wasn't what I got into. I mean, like anybody who's honest about why do I want to play a guitar, well, I want to be like the guys on Countdown.
Yep.
I don't want to read off a sheet of music. I don't want to play classical. I want to play rock. I want to be the guy on stage that all the girls are looking at going, oh, man, what a great guy. So that's how I got into music. I played in an original band out of high school. I wrote a lot of songs and was in a band called the Chrome Trojans, who, we got a little bit of record company interest back in the day, and then the band broke up over what we call it in the game creative differences.
Yep.
And I mean that was a long-term project for me. And then I met one of my heroes from a band called Tism.
Yes.
And he was a guitarist in Tism, and we met, and the first night that we met, we drank a bottle of whiskey together, and we've been firm friends ever since.
Fantastic.
And we played in an Irish band called the Mulligans around town. There was a time when lots and lots of work as a professional muso, playing a mix of Irish tunes and Australian covers and a bit of Chumbawamba and some stuff in between, a bit of Van Morrison. So I worked as a professional muso, and I also kept writing original stuff on the side. So by 2003, I'd just come back from the UK, where I'd put out my first sort of original CD, and I had a bit of a mishap in Germany, where I broke my wrist quite badly playing Australian rules football in Germany. And that's a whole other story, but that happened, and that brought me back to Melbourne in pieces and waiting for surgery. And while I was doing that, I hooked up with another fellow I'd met on my travels, and my first foray into comedy was as part of a duo called Ian and Charlie from Golders Green. We were the lightly lads, and we put on the accents like this, and we walked around the streets of London one time on a bit of a binge, and we were going up to people trying to sell them Persian plastic. And so we used to go on stage and do jokes like, we are great businessmen, I mean, as a businessman, you should never, ever put all your eggs in one basket, And then the tagline was like, well, how many baskets do you need for a dozen eggs? Is it 12? Is it 6? I mean, how many eggs? You don't want to put them all in one, but how many baskets do you have? And we lasted about 10 gigs. But we did go up to Canberra. I remember doing a thing called Green Faces, which A-List ran. And I actually took the bus. On the bus up there that time, I was in a bus with Charlie Pickering. And I was in a bus with Yanni, who is now well and truly cemented as part of the circuit, both here in Australia and the UK. And I mean, to some degree, I think I chose to do that because I was still scared to get up and do comedy per se.
So, well, perhaps you could explain what Green Faces is, because again, for the audience, they don't know. It's a talent challenge, isn't it? You don't have...
It's basically a comedy, it's like a comedy competition. You went up and competed, and then if you got through from the heat to the next stage and the next stage, I don't even know if it's still running. I really don't know. But it was great because they put you in a Tarago, and the Tarago was paid for, and you got to drive up to Canberra and stay in a hotel for the night, and feel like you're on tour. I remember going up one time and Michael Connell, when he was barely 16 years old, he was on that on one of the trips that I did. I think I did it a couple of times, Zine and Charlie once, and then I think I did it in my own right.
Yep.
Because we only lasted 10 gigs, Zine and Charlie, and then the fellow I was doing it with was
created differences.
He was an electrician, and he said, I just wanted to prove I could do this. I don't want to do it anymore. And so my first ever gig as a stand-up comedian was at a gig called Stage Time that Charlie Pickering and Michael Chamberlain ran way back in 2002, I think that was.
And not Michael Chamberlain of Dingo's Got My Baby then?
No, that's a different Michael Chamberlain. Michael Chamberlain is now mainly a behind-the-scenes writer in the industry, so he writes on...
Right.
He wrote on shows like Before the Game at Network 10 before. So he's a writer. I think he's actually writing on The Weekly, because Charlie and Michael did a lot of stuff together.
Yep, that makes sense.
And so that's where I first stood up and did my first spot, and right from the get-go I did stuff that was political.
Yep.
And a lot of people, it was political, and I had this silly parody of a Natalie Imbruglia song, Natalie Imbruglia song Torn.
Yep.
Which I still use to this day because it still works, and it's got a Shane Warne joke in it that still gets laughed 16 years later. So that's pretty sad, commentary on Shane Warne and how much personal growth hasn't happened there.
Well, let's go back a little bit to free comedy. You mentioned free comedy in your sort of intro, and you mentioned Stevie Sticks, for example, is going overseas, and free comedy, the Australian version, is a mirror of, I believe, an Edinburgh idea. Is that my understanding?
Yeah, that's correct. It's Peter Buckley Hill. The PBH Free Fringe stands for Peter Buckley Hill, and it's their 23rd year this year in Edinburgh. Peter was the first guy to come up with the idea of let the audience in for free and then ask them to contribute what the show is worth at the end.
Yes.
And I met Peter in 2005 when, without knowing what he was doing, I hadn't heard of what he was doing in 2005. At the Edinburgh Fringe, I did a show called Che Guevara on the Fringe that worked on exactly the same principle. I'll let you in for free, then you put money in the hat at the end. Yep. And that's as simple as it is. It's basically busking but indoors.
Yes, makes sense. And you've been doing it for 7 years here in Australia, in Melbourne specifically. Yeah.
I went to the Edinburgh Fringe in 2011, passing through, and saw that the free show model had grown, and that Peter Buckley Hill now had a rival in the Free Festival, and that's a whole story in and of itself. But having seen how much it had succeeded and revolutionised the Edinburgh Fringe, I thought we already had plans to run at Station 59, where I ran open mic with Nick Stevens and Adam Marsh at the time. We had plans to do a festival season in 2012, and I suggested that we move to the free model, and that's where we started, and we just kept on rolling along.
Right. Well, you've kind of name dropped a word there, and I think I'll move forward in the questions slightly, because you did mention Station 59, and you've talked also already about having quite a political slant to your comedy. Actually, we'll go back a step. Why do you have such a political slant? You know, TISM fan. I'm assuming Midnight Oil was one of your bands in the day. They're quite political.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I was brought up on a diet of Peter Garrett and the politics therein. I mean, I went to university. I had a politics. I took politics as a subject at high school, and I had a politics teacher who just kept pushing me to understand more and more about how politics works. I mean, back then it was looking at Australian politics, and I think we looked at South African politics. I ended up going to university and double majoring in an arts degree in politics, and of course I was attracted to TISM because they did iconoclastic satire about political issues and personalities.
Yeah, that's right.
So they did satire on the likes of Alan Bond and Christopher Skase and Darren Hinch, and they would do topical political stuff, And look, the first time I saw a TISM gig, I grew up in Frankston. I walked into the 21st Century Dance Club to hang out with a guy called Peter Couples, and next door there was a band called TISM I'd never heard of in 1988. And I walked in, took one look at what they were doing, and actually thought to myself, I didn't know you were allowed to do that stuff on a stage.
Wow.
And it was a really important moment in my artistic development, because I suddenly realised that all the stuff that I thought in my head, which I thought I wasn't allowed to say out loud, somebody else was doing it. But they were doing it with balaclavas on their faces. And that intrigued me as well. And I thought, wow, that gives you a lot of freedom to be able to say whatever you like with a balaclava on your face. Turns out that doesn't give you all the freedom in the world, because TISM did a lot of things they got sued for. Famously, Ken Doan got real mad with them when they ripped off his artwork on the CD. Are we allowed to use profanity on?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the CD was called the Australia the Lucky Cunt, and they had to pull that straight away because Ken Doan got real litigious. And luckily, one of the TISM boys is a very well credentialed lawyer, so he always knew what to do when it came to that sort of stuff. So, look, I mean, the TISM runs through my work, I think, almost as a motif. But definitely, they inspired me to be able to say, to start speaking out and saying the things that I wanted to say. And when I got into comedy, well, I mean, it was I think the TISM influence comes out in heaps of my work, and I'm happy to acknowledge that.
And I've seen some videos of you at the comedy festival, talking about certain things that are close to your heart, and you've got the balaclava on, and it's a tribute to TISM, which you emphasise in that as well. So,
well, that was a night that they were having a TISM tribute downstairs in the Hi-Fi bar, where a band fronted by Geraldine Quinn and a bunch of guest comics were singing TISM songs. So I thought, what would TISM do if that would happen? Well, they would turn up in balaclavas in character and do TISM stuff. And so me and a friend of mine put balaclavas on, and we pulled this ridiculous stunt where we made giant passes that weren't real and presented them at the door and said, here are our giant passes, we need to get in, we're members of TISM, whilst wearing balaclavas, which I thought was, the height of the type of piss take that TISM would have done back in the day.
Yeah, freedom of speech is quite, prevalent in everything that you do to this day, in fact. And I want to go back in that political sphere that we're discussing. I want to go back to perhaps where, I know you did. You made the papers, and your name became synonymous with freedom of speech and comedy and risque topics and taboos. And I'm talking about that incident in at Station 59 now, and feel free to jump in and clarify anything that may have got wrong. But for those that don't know, you're running you're running a comedy room at Station 59, which I believe is in Richmond.
So I'll just cut to the chase. We're talking about the There's Nothing Funny About Rape debate that happened at Station 59 that got cancelled. Well, look, I can just clarify. This is on the public record. On Insight, I appeared in 2014 with Angelo DaCosta. I was not the organiser of There's Nothing Funny About Rape. The story, as it goes word for word, is that Angelo called me up about 6 weeks beforehand, because I booked about 6 weeks in ahead. Angelo had done the space I ran at the Station 59 for open mic was anything goes, okay? So that was said to the owner of the pub. Anybody can say whatever they want on that stage, and we don't censor them. And then as the room developed and comedians started coalescing around it, people started asking, can we do a night where we do each other's material? So we did that. Can we do a night where we resurrect old material? Angelo DaCosta organised that. In 2012, during the Fringe, Angelo DaCosta organised a couple of comedy debates. I think one was about pornography and the other one was about something else. And so we had the runs on the board as having organised some stuff, and I just would say, there's the space, do what you want with it. And he rang me and he said, I want to do a debate about taboo topics in comedy. And I said, well, what have you got on the list? And he said, the Holocaust, cancer and rape. And I said, well, at the moment, Daniel Tosh is in the papers because of what had happened in 2012 with him over in the States. And there was also a Republican senator that had made some ridiculous statement about how you can't get pregnant from rape. And so I said, look, that seems to be the most topical thing. And he goes, well, yeah, we're just going to talk about taboo topics, but let's just make that the title. And and I said, yeah, fine.
There's nothing funny about rape. That was the title.
Yeah, and so I said, that's the title, and I put the phone down and forgot about it until the day I got a phone call from the manager of the pub saying all these people are calling and they've all been offended by a poster. And to be honest, I had to think about, hang on, what's this all about? Oh, that's right, I'd said to Angelo, you can do this thing. So and Angelo picks the people who were to appear. Yep. Rob Caruana made a poster and then put it out without asking anybody. Within 20 minutes, everybody who was on the debate actually got in touch with him and said, dude, take that down. But by the time that had happened, it had been spotted by, activists online of a feminist persuasion, and they were, justifiably outraged because from the outside in, it looked like it was badly organised and badly thought out. Yep. But the bottom line is, to this day, I will still say of every single person on that lineup, I would say that they would have given a good account of themselves. Yep. I thought it was a discussion that people needed to have, and I don't know how much planning Angelo put into it. Once we got an insight, he basically said, I'm going to do another debate. Who wants to be in it? All these people put their hand up and said, yeah, I want to be in it. He wrote down those names. Then he came up with the topic. Yeah, right. But it was always going to be an expansive debate and a comedy debate too. So in a comedy debate, people who are often arguing on the affirmative will argue the negative for comedy effect and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So I never really understood how you could just take this literal, it's a debate, and someone would really be standing there and saying, there is something funny about rape, because one, we meant rape jokes, obviously. And as I said on Insight, what's interesting about that, experiencing that is, we were a small open mic room that sometimes, if it was full, there was 50 people in it. Right? And nobody paid any attention to anything that we did until such time as they got offended by a poster and decided that they wanted to shut something down that hadn't happened yet. Yeah. That's the long and the short of it.
Well, actually, on that last line about being offended at something that hadn't happened, I'm going to, if you don't mind, I'm going to read from your letter, I imagine, to Crikey, which Crikey then published.
Oh, I asked for a right of reply to an article that had been written by Courtney Hocking. I think it was that Crikey article. I remember writing that.
Okay. Well, I found this particular, it was quite a long rebuttal, so I just pulled out, I think, a paragraph that I found quite interesting, relevant for this topic.
Yeah, I'm going to read it too.
Yeah, so you said, what also perplexed me was that people had been offended by something that hadn't happened yet. People made assumptions about what an all-male lineup were going to talk about. They were wrong. One of the participants burst into tears when he told me he had planned to speak about being raped. He felt as though he had been silenced, stereotyped, pigeonholed before even he got a chance to express an opinion. People said an all-male lineup was wrong in principle. I would counter that by saying it is male comedians who needed to have this discussion, and they've been talking. The mob has most definitely spooked them. Freedom of speech is easy to support when everyone is nodding in agreement. Now, I like that last line, freedom of speech is easy to support when everyone is nodding in agreement.
Yeah, you always get heaps of fans when everybody's saying, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, go on. Yeah, it's the Voltaire thing I'm referring to.
Well, it's I think, a more modern version of Voltaire, isn't it? I don't agree with what you say, but I'll defend to the death. Right to say it? That's right.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the thing is to clarify what I meant when I wrote that, if Angelo had called me and said, what do you think about having an all-male lineup for this topic, I would have said, that's ridiculous. But as I said, all the people had signed up for the debate before he actually gave them the topic, if you know what I mean. And I know that moves were afoot on the afternoon when everything blew up to actually add women to the lineup. There were women that put their hands up and said, hey, I want to be a part of this, before it all got shut down. I would probably have said that the inclusion, that a 50-50 split might have been a good idea if someone had asked me. But I was never asked. Okay, so but I still maintain the point that it is probably the male comedians who need to have an open and honest discussion about these types of jokes. Right. And so I'd stand by what I said, that if I'm honest, I mean, I think that male comedians should also hear from women about what it's like to receive those jokes as well. But once the whole thing had been set up in that instance, I was commenting on what had been mooted and making that point. Freedom of speech is easy to support when everyone is not in agreement. Yep, I do still hold that view. I think free speech is one that catches out a lot of people, I think, in terms of as soon as they hear something. We're getting a lot of this now from the right side of politics, you see. Yeah. After listening to the likes of Donald Trump and Tony Abbott, just to name a few, marching about the place, they're always saying, political correctness has gone mad. You can't say stuff anymore. As soon as you say something they don't like, they're off to the fucking parliament and they want to pass some legislation to silence some journalists. So, I think it comes from both sides. I think the problem the left has got, over a long period of time, and I tried to make this point in 2012. Progressives and leftist people, who have, let's be honest about this, have engaged in a bit of let's stop people saying things we don't like. Now, I've always said this, and I said this on the night of the 14th of November 2012 from the stage. I believe in unqualified free speech up to the line where we start to break the law. So if you wanted to get this debate cancelled and you'd called up the pub and said, hey, Mr. Pub owner, I'm offended by the title of your debate. I want you to shut it down for this reason, that reason, this argument, that argument. Great. Speak freely. Say everything that is on your mind, And I think Adrienne Truscott actually said on the Insight program when she was asked, would you have wanted it shut down? She said, no, I would have wanted to turn up and have my say. And I agree with with the sentiments that she put in that particular point. But when it comes to the situation that really happened, which is what I said on Insight, the reason that the fellow that owned Station 59 cancelled the debate was because he was being threatened over the phone with the destruction of property at his business, violence visited upon himself and his family, and the rape of his children, I think, was one that came up. Now, as soon as you've done that, you've broken the law, That's right. That's the speech you're not allowed to have. It's the same with defamation. Defamation law is important because it's what it does is it sets a line in the sand and says you can't go around saying untrue things about somebody, and so that everybody has a lower opinion of that person. 18C, I agree with 18C. Because 18D comes after it and is a qualifying, 18C, the Racial Discrimination Act. That sort of thing, I agree with the law putting limits on how we speak. Incitement, hate speech, incitement to a crowd of people to run over there and go and do something to those people that we don't like, I don't agree with that sort of speech. I think we need to have limits on that sort of speech. There are limits on free speech in the societies that we live in. But when it comes to take that qualification out of it, take the law out of it, there is a problem with the left embracing censorship, because here's what's about to happen in the world now. The right are going to start censoring everybody, and I tell you what, they're going to do it much harsher, and they're going to shut you down big time. They're passing legislation through the Australian Parliament to limit freedom of speech as we speak, And that cuts to journalists, it cuts to satirists, and those lines are going to be tested on a legislative basis. This is what I was trying to say, but no one was listening, is if we engage in censorship on the left of things that we don't like, and believe me, I sat in my own room and watched comedians say things that made me go, oh, my God, are you for real? I can't, And I'd often speak back to that when I got on stage afterwards. I would often say, listen, man, that joke there that you've done, you need to work on the delivery of what you've done there. Maybe you want to stay away from that sort of stuff until you've worked out what you really think. But I also think that in order for comedians to be able to play in dangerous territory, they have to be able to try, fail. And Brendan Burns said exactly that when he was asked to comment on the aftermath of that debate. And I've watched Brendan try and fail, and I've done it myself. I've done jokes myself, and had the audience like them, but then thought to myself afterwards, no, I'm not going to do that anymore because I'm not actually making any proper social comment there. I'm just getting away with a bit of a shock value type of thing. And you can do that with your Holocaust and your cancer and your rape jokes and your murder jokes and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And so, that's where I think that stands. I think there ends up being a little bit of, I believe in free speech as long as everyone's saying stuff that I'm into. But then as soon as somebody says, Abbott does that all the time and Trump does it all the time. He was elected on I'm going to get rid of PC. Then as soon as he gets elected, they're all fake news. I'm going to shut them down. I'm going to make sure they don't get to broadcast that. I'm going to stop certain people coming to press conferences. So, we're all a bit guilty, I think, sometimes of having to keep ourselves in check with respect to the stuff that we don't like. But I learned at 59 to listen to things that I disagreed with.
Yep.
And just listen, and then if I need to respond, I respond. But people don't stop thinking things if you tell them they can't say them. They just don't. So you might as well have them saying that stuff. And I think I pointed that out in my Crikey article. I want Andrew Bolt to have freedom of speech because I want to know what sort of stupid thing is going on in that man's head.
Yeah, true. Well, Chris Wainhouse, my last interviewee, was talking. I asked him about taboos, and he said, no, I have to cut you off there. There are no taboos, which is what sort of we're discussing around at the moment.
Well, there just can't be. There can't be taboos because one thing that when you do comedy, right, you're one of the last people in the world who's given permission to say unsayable things. Okay, it's a big responsibility, but it is something that I think a lot of people, and I know the areas that Chris works in as well. There are particular comedians who cherish that I can say things that a lot of people can't say out loud. And so, therefore, he's 100% correct. There are no taboo topics. What I couldn't understand about the argument that came from the other side, and this was the argument that came from the other side because I read it over and over. We haven't got a problem with rape jokes. It's just that people at the open mic level aren't allowed to do them because they haven't got enough experience. Well, I'll tell you this for true. You can't do observational comedy about the difference between cats and dogs and what's going on with relationships and, all Tinder and that, and then suddenly turn around after 3 years of doing that and go, well, I've got my 3 years done. Now I've got my 3-year comedy badge. Now I'm going to start tackling taboo topics because it's a whole different discipline.
Sure,
you have to start from the start, and in comedy I did. I talked on stage in 2003 about boats being turned back. I mean, I tackled those subjects way back then, and I learned how to do that sort of comedy by doing it. It's comedy's a weird thing like that. You have to do it. And then fail and then do it and try again and come back. And I think an open mic comedy room is a perfect place to try that, especially away from, the responsibility of making an audience laugh because you're expecting a wage out of it or something like that. So, I agree with Chris. I agree.
Yeah. Well, he went on also to say that if you do have taboo, if taboo is created and we can't talk about things, then he mentioned Bill Cosby and the outing of Bill Cosby as being, a sex pest, potential rapist, as having come out in a comedian's stand-up, and that it was one of these well-known secrets, Emperor's New Clothes. And when this guy talked about it for the first time publicly, everyone already knew within that circle that it became rape. It was a rape joke. It became a topic that other people could then talk about. And as we know, that cascaded into a whole big movement, Me Too and so on. And a lot of good has come out of that particular episode. But
what I just said, we get permission to say the unsayable. Now, Hannibal Buress decided, obviously, that he'd had enough of the fact that everybody turned a blind eye to this. And we have examples right now in Australia where certain things have happened that are being swept under the carpet.
Yep.
You know, I've heard some stories through the networks of certain comedians in this country who are not as high profile as Bill Cosby, but they're not nobodies.
Right.
Okay? And I've heard some stuff, and maybe one day someone in Australian comedy might have the courage to walk on stage and take on those topics. But if they do, they will be taking on some serious power brokers in the industry.
Yeah, right.
And when you take on power brokers in the industry, which I have walked onto comedy stages and called out the Melbourne International Comedy Festival for what I consider to be their conflicts of interest in the way the festival is structured, and other such related things. And I have suffered for that because I have taken on some people who are very, very powerful in the industry. And if you wanted to speak out against some of these people, you take on powerful people. So Hannibal Buress was taking a huge risk when he did that.
Right.
But that's the type of thing that a comedian who's decided, I don't just want to talk about the difference between cats and dogs and stuff I noticed while I went to the supermarket. That's the type of thing a comedian gets the courage to do.
Sure, I understand. Well, because we are going well over time here, I want to make sure that we get to some of the other questions. The audience, as I mentioned, that listen to this podcast are starting out in comedy. They are relatively new, maybe a couple of months old, maybe a couple of years old, just not finding traction. In a nutshell, what advice, obviously you've mentioned a fair bit of advice, get out there, practice, don't be afraid of saying some of the taboo subjects early on in your career because you've got to say them. You can't wait 3 years. But what other advice would you give to newcomers to comedy out there?
There were in America a few years ago, a fellow got up. He got up on a stage to talk about this very subject, starting out in comedy at the open mic level. And he said to those assembled, what you all have to realise is it's going to take you at least 5, actually more like 10 years to find your voice. Now, he changed that on a dime. He doubled the time just like that. Now, to comedians starting out, what comedy is the search to find your voice. Once we get on stage, most of the time we imitate the people that we like. We write jokes in the similar style. We'll often go into the same sort of almost like physical antics.
Yep.
You can see the influences in a new comedian of the comedians that they've been listening to. So you go through that process, and Dave Grant, who once said to me, when I asked him for some advice when I first started, he said, how many have you done? And I said, I've done 10 gigs with Ian and Charlie, and that's my 4th or 5th spot there. And he goes, come back to me when you've done 50. Because when you've done 50, we'll be able to have a conversation about the fact that you're going to have to get to 200.
Yep.
And when you get to 200, you're going to have to get to 500.
Yeah,
and you'll have to get to 1,000. You see, I worked really hard in the first 18 months and got heaps and heaps of stage time. The key to becoming a good comedian is getting heaps of stage time.
Yeah.
But I would say to a lot of comedians, and accept that you can't race to find your voice. It's just going to one day you'll just suddenly realise, and this is the secret that most people probably don't tell you. You start to find your comedy voice when you stop caring what happens.
Yep.
And that's a hard thing to do because nobody wants to go on stage and die. No one. Right. But when you start getting, and that's talked about. I mean, I've hung out with a lot of comics all over the world and had late night conversations in green rooms and talked about comedy because that's often all we talk about. And getting to that stage where you actually sort of stop caring. And I mean, I thought I got there at one point in 2010. Yep. And then I sort of backslid a bit, and it took me another 3 years. And I think over the last 5 years, I can actually genuinely say I think I've found my voice, like Kieran Butler's voice, not a sort of offcut of all of the people who have influenced me in my comedy.
Right.
And so my advice to young comedians who are starting out, or people start at all sorts of times of life, is just you've just got to do the time, My mate talks about the 10,000 hours theory. I don't know if you've heard of it. You've got to do something for 10,000 hours to get good at it.
Yeah.
Well,
sure.
That applies to comedy. And so you're doing it in 5-minute chunks.
Where does someone go to see you do your work?
Well, at the moment, tomorrow night, Tuesday the 17th of July, they'll get to see me MC Free Comedy at the Highlander. But after that, they'll probably have to jump on a plane to Edinburgh because I'll be performing over there. I haven't really looked at what I'll be doing once I get back.
Well, we do have some listeners overseas. How can they find out where you are when you're in Scotland?
Oh, okay. You want to come and see my Edinburgh Fringe season? The show's called Australia Origin of Fucked. It's at 9:35 p.m. That's important, 9:35 p.m. because there are shows on the 9:30 a.m. in the morning, the Edinburgh Fringe. 9:35 p.m. which is it's down there on South Clark Street or something. Look, if you look up the Ed Fringe website, I think all of those details will be loaded in the next few days, and it's all sort of printed up in the Peter Buckley Hill Free Fringe booklet. But look, just there'll be details on my website as well. I'll get all of that up over the next couple of days.
And what is your website to share for the audience?
If you want to go to my website, kieranbutler.com, you can go and check out some of my satirical songs and bits and pieces from the journey over all the stuff that I've done. I used to do a show called Collingwood Ruined My Life, about being a Collingwood supporter. There's my little folk outfit that I do with my partner in life, Michelle. We're called Whimsical Tricycle. There's stuff on there about Ben Cousins, a rock opera, Ned Kelly last stand-up. So you can see a whole bunch of stuff of my work at kieranbutler.com, but I will be putting the details up of the show fairly soon. Excellent. I just haven't got around to it because I'm not really great with the old admin stuff. As most comedians will admit, when you're self-managed,
that is true.
It's the admin that kills you.
Well, that is where I have seen a bit of a niche market, as you probably have guessed, with the School of Hard Knocks. So,
yes, being organised is something comedians need to be taught.
That's right. Well, normally I ask a 10th question, and rather than ask you a question, I'm going to give you essentially the last word for Eurydice Dixon, who, as we know, was tragically murdered in Melbourne, part of the comedy community, and also someone very close to you as well. So I'm going to finish with your voice, and then I'm going to finish with her voice at the end of this podcast.
In my opinion, it was my considered opinion that Eurydice, because she was so young, and I thought that she had all the time in the world, I thought that if she wanted to, she could go on to break new ground in comedy, especially as a political comedian. Yeah. A lot of her stuff was incredibly political, and she had this amazing ability to be a staunch feminist but poke fun at feminism and third wave feminists specifically. She could see, she had a lawyer's brain. She could see an argument from both sides. Yeah. And I thought that she was she was brave and courageous as a comedian. She could it didn't seem to bother her to walk on stage and talk for long periods of time to silence if she was working on a new bit. She often just walked straight onto stage and fleshed out ideas. Yeah. And as a person, it was a privilege to get to know her. I worked on a podcast, which we ended up not releasing any episodes of, except for I think one that we put out a few months ago just because it was there, and I thought I'll just pop that up. And I worked on a podcast with her and a fellow called David Strader, and I mean, I've been named in the press as her mentor, which, look, I suppose I probably was. I took her under my wing a little bit and tried to show her a couple of things. But I was always very reluctant to interfere in her process because she was so young. I gave her a couple of stagecraft tips, but I suppose it was in the podcast that we used to talk before we turned on the microphones. I used to say, make sure you expand on your ideas and speak a little bit more, because me and my mate Dave Strader could go on like two old ladies if she wasn't careful. And she was. She was a person who was loyal and trustworthy and highly intelligent and brave and courageous. And as I said in my eulogy at her funeral, I know now from being on this earth for 48 years, you don't meet people like that all the time. Those people are very special. There was, and she, and this comes from the bottom of my heart. She came along at a time. I think with a lot of the comedy that I do and some others, a friend of mine in Edinburgh once said, it's you and Brendan Burns and a couple of other comedians. You guys are not scared to go into the dark to look for the light.
Yeah.
And I often think about that debate that we spoke about earlier and how out of that debate came, Tamara Issa decided to organise in solidarity an all-women's comedy night, because a lot of the girls used to say that Station 59 was one of the better places to perform as a woman, because I had an equality policy. I had a you can say whatever you want policy. I don't really see comedians as men and women. I just look at their work and judge it on its own merit.
Right.
And Tamara Issa organised Twisted Comedy, which was all-female open mic, and that became Yes All Women, which became monthly, and it was there that Eurydice actually was flourishing as a comedian. And it took me a while to realise this, but when she left, as Tony said, she, now she's gone away. I do feel like I lost the light that I might have been looking for, and that's hard. That's really hard to take both personally and artistically. I'm going to try not to get emotional. There's been a lot of crying happening, but look, she was just an exceptional performer and writer, not just in comedy. I mean, she might not have chosen to do comedy. She could have acted. She could have been a writer. She could have done anything. And but as I said in the eulogy, those comics are special to me, and she was one of those who went into the dark places to see what she could find. I mean, her bit that she used to do, and I think the only way I can pay tribute to her the best is to repeat some of the material I saw her do, this was one joke that I was actually envious of. I wish I'd written it. And she did this beautiful piece where she used to say, I'm a feminist, right? But I've been looking at suicide, and it turns out that 3 out of every 4 suicides are men. So, I don't know. I mean, if we're looking at equality, they don't look like real equal numbers, But then I did some more deep diving into it, and it turns out that it's not like women aren't trying. It's just that they're not very good at it. In fact, more women try to kill themselves than men, but they don't succeed, And so she said, I think we have to do one of two things, girls, okay? I think we have to try a little bit harder when we're trying to kill ourselves, or just admit that there's one thing that men can do better than women.
Right.
Now, I mean, that type of insight from somebody so young, from someone coming from my perspective as I get older, and the journey that I've taken in comedy, I mean, can you imagine standing at the back of the room being me going, my God, she's saying that stuff at 21.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, my God, I was too scared to walk on a stage and try and do comedy at 21. I didn't start until I was 30.
Yeah.
So that's how brave she was. That's how intelligent she was. But past all of that, she's just a wonderful person.
Sure.
And we've lost a real we've lost a real good one there, and in horrific circumstances. One of the hardest phone calls I've ever taken was to hear from the police that day, and the day after the gig, and I'm going to miss her. I'm going to miss her for the rest of my life. I've lived through a couple of friends who were close to me, and one who was really close in particular, who were both boys who suicided in their 20s.
Right.
And one thing I know about these things is they never leave you, and so she's left a massive gap in a lot of our lives, and we will take a long time to process it. But rest assured, she was. I think she could have been one of the greats.
Well,
Absolutely.
I think we'll leave the last word to Eurydice Dixon. I believe the recording is from May 29th of this year, and we'll let her demonstrate her amazing ability as a stand-up comedian.
Just because I have a bit of a tendency to worry a lot about things that I shouldn't worry about. Sometimes I worry we're going to end up in a slave society. Just girly things. Just normal shit, right? We worry. But we shouldn't. We really shouldn't. It's not going to happen for ages. We'll all be dead by then. It's not going to happen till the robots take over. But I can't stop worrying. Right? In my mind, I'm like, shit. And I'm trying to be more optimistic. So I'm like, slave society, that means no one has any rights. We'll finally have gender equality. Equally shit, still equal. The third wave feminists will be happy, won't they? They keep telling everybody, that's all we want! Is it? It's not all I want. That's why I'm a feminist and not an equitist. I have very specific things I want my equality to include. Positive equality, not negative equality. Of course, it'll be positive for the robots, won't they? That's positive equality. All right, that's all I wanted to try. Thanks.